Eucatastrophe by A Real Sword. Chapter 6. Logan. Oh, Logan hates himself. He really, truly does. The thing is, it makes sense. It makes an uncomfortable amount of sense. Because Octavian of Cadath had been strangely familiar, and so had the toll person, Shane d'Arc. And that's not to mention the 20 or so people that he and Remus had passed and encountered briefly while exploring that town, all of whom had made some distant part of his awareness uncomfortable and suspicious in a way he couldn't quite place at the time. But looking right at the Earl King like that, and seeing the awareness reflected back from a consciousness so different and yet so horribly familiar, it had made the truth entirely obvious. But the thing is, it doesn't make sense. They look nothing alike, and there's not even a name etymology connection here. It's not as if Logan has any Germanic history to it, quite the opposite. And this Earl King has taken Thomas, and is claiming ownership of him in an entirely illogical and irrational way, and they just can't be the same person. He had attempted to explain his reasoning to Roman, very calmly and clearly, but it didn't seem to have gotten through to him in the slightest. Roman had nodded along through the first 10 seconds of explanation, and then said, "Specs, you know I love you, but we do not have time for this, and really it's probably not as important as catching up to the Fairy King who's stolen our center, so hurry up, let's go!" And that had been the end of that attempt. Even though Logan's still reeling, trying to piece it all together in his mind, and his headache is rising, and he kind of wants to scream or else make some kind of exclamatory noise to suitably vent his frustration in himself and the world around him, and the Earl King, especially the Earl King. He had let Roman drag him forward through the open castle gates and toward the rest of the group, who are, in turn, hurrying as fast as they can in the wake of the Earl King, who's sweeping through the halls with all the confidence and certainty that comes with him owning the place. In any other circumstances he'd be fascinated and possibly quite distracted by the rather stunning architectural design of the castle itself. The hallways are vast stone caverns that appear to be hollowed out entirely naturally, although the complexity of said hollowing indicates otherwise. And then there's clear pan-European Baroque inspirations working behind quite a bit of it, which is as fascinating as it is puzzling, because all evidence would suggest that this world that they found themselves in would date to a somewhat anachronistic version of the mid-16th century, rather than early 17th century time period Baroque architecture would typically hail from. But he's not thinking about any of that, because there are far more important things to consider. The Earl King is leading them down a series of long, twisting paths that don't seem to ever intersect at right angles, and also don't seem to obey the laws of physics or space or placement in general. Either they're going around in circles at a very subtle incline that Logan hasn't been able to perceive, or the geography of this mountain palace is actually changing as they walk through it. There are other Fae in the hallways, or at least it can be reasonably assumed that they are Fae, considering the appropriate context clues. Some of them are humanoid enough in appearance, but others distinctly animalistic, incorporating features from creatures such as bears and possums and various bright-colored avian species in their corporeal forms. Others still appear only as faint, hazy streaks of light that orbit other creatures lazily, or drift through the rooms and halls at irregular paces. All of these beings seem to pause momentarily to regard their group as they pass by, but none of them engage. Perhaps because the Earl King is there and is cutting a very imposing figure indeed. "The first thing we need to do is," Logan begins, but is cut off because everybody else has opinions that they want to share at the exact same time as him, and now that he's begun to express his own, they seem to have taken it as a signal to do the same. "We need to get Thomas back," Virgil says, "and guys, keep it down. He might hear us." "He can hear us anyway," growls Janice, who is still maintaining a glare that promises violence directly at the Earl King's back. He's pretending not to. "How did we lose an entire Thomas?" Patton whispers, distraught. "Again!" "The first thing we need to do," says Logan in a harsh whisper, clenching his hands into fists and tucking them firmly behind his back so nobody can see how horrendously emotional he's getting, "is figure out what we have that he wants. We need a position to bargain from." "We have nothing that he wants," Janice says, with a slightly angry hiss to the end of the sentence that he barely seems to notice himself. "Our best plan at this point is skipping the bargaining entirely, finding Thomas somehow and breaking him out." "Or I could fuck the Earl King," Remus offers. I bet he'd want that. Logan would usually dismiss this as one of his usual, wildly unhelpful interjections, but Remus really does seem quite serious about it. He stops walking for a split second, processing this, and then says, as genuinely as he can under this amount of stress, "Thank you, Remus, but I hope that won't be necessary. Let's put a metaphorical pin in that and come back to it later, all right?" "Just as long as you know the offer's there," says Remus. They resume walking. "Okay, much as I hate to admit it, but Janice has a point." The growl in Virgil's voice has faded from his voice, but he still sounds tense and on edge, and in serious need of a break and some breathing exercises that Logan is too preoccupied to provide. What do we have that he wants? Logan wants to open his mouth and have an answer for him, but nothing's there. This situation is dangerously close to spiraling out of control. He's so incredibly out of his depth that he's amazed nobody else has seen and commented on it yet, although perhaps that's just because they're all stuck in the same situation. There are another set of doors up ahead, and a lot less fey beings lurking around them. The Earth King throws up one hand, and the doors slam open immediately, perfectly on cue, and strides forth to enter the room, which turns out to be not so much a room as a garden. It's open to the air and bordered only by arches of wood and vines, and, empirically speaking, it's so much more impressive than the garden surrounding the mountain palace had been on every conceivable level. The grass is as green as a perfectly oxidized chromium oxide. There are flowers everywhere, enough to make any botanist weep for the sheer quantity and assortment of them, and the heady perfume just about knocks Logan back physically the moment he tries to step in. Patton sneezes and mutters a quick apology, but quite frankly that's the least of their concerns right now. They all file in. The light streak fae are everywhere in here, zipping from tree to bush, vine to throne, carrying out inscrutable little tasks. A couple of them circle around the Earl King as he enters, vibrating and humming gently, but he brushes them all aside. He strides forth to the center of the room. There, a tangle of strategically bent branches spout upward from the earth, covered in moss and petals, and forming what appears to be some sort of a naturally grown throne. "We want Thomas back," declares Logan, getting right to the point, "and we're willing to negotiate for his return." "But you have nothing that I want," the Earl King points out, although he seems relaxed and calm, as if he'd been expecting this entirely. Of course he's been expecting it. It's exactly the sort of thing Logan would expect in his place. "Why should I be expected to give you what you desire when there's nothing you could conceivably offer me in return?" "You can have me," Patton blurts. There's a moment of absolute silence, and then a lot of people start objecting very loudly at once, but the Earl King waves his hand at all of them in such a genuinely threatening manner that those objections die down pretty quickly. "What would I want with you?" says the Earl King, seeming genuinely interested in the answer. "You're not even a full person in your own right. You're only a fragment of a whole." "Well, holy moly, that's kinda harsh," Patton says, and lets out a burst of nervous laughter. "I mean, what I was gonna say is, you definitely want me, because I am Thomas's heart." "Metaphorically," Logan can't help muttering. Virgil steps on his foot. "And I remember you were talking earlier about not having that heart of his, and I figured that if you wanted it so badly—" He raises both hands, wiggles his fingers, and beams, although his grin is slightly wilted. "I have morality. Hello." "What use is the heart without the whole?" asks the Earl King, looking suddenly disinterested, although Logan suspects it's more of an affectation than his true feelings on the matter. "And what good is the whole without the heart?" Roman snaps back. "Like it or not, the Thomas that you've got right now is incomplete. You need him for whatever reason. You're gonna need us too, because we are him, and we're what makes him whole." "To be perfectly honest," says the Earl King, "I don't need him, and I don't need you. At least, not specifically and not entirely. All I need is a soul." He eyes them, and that hint of darkly playful amusement is back. "Would you say that any of you have a soul?" There's no response for a long, long moment, mainly because that's a question none of them have an immediate answer to, because they don't know. The concepts of souls existing is under hot debate. Thomas himself does believe in the concept, Logan knows that, but he himself is understandably rather skeptical of it. Not enough that he'd voice it and cause Thomas to suffer cognitive dissonance between his values and logic. It's not important enough of a scientific concern, but it's always been sitting in the back of his mind, quietly, waiting to be dusted off for discussion. And now Logan is thinking about the Socratic concept of soul, the trifold model, logos, thymos, eros, head, heart, desire. He's thinking about the Aristotelian model, and wondering if all of them are accurate enough mirrors of Thomas himself to be considered fully actualized rational souls, or maybe one soul altogether. He's thinking about the Hillman theory, and about the Athanasian theory, and about Kant's congruency between soul and I. He's wondering if souls are real here, or anywhere else, or if it's one of them, or several of them, or all of them, or none of them that make up Thomas's essence. If you were to take them all away, what would be left? Would there be anything left? Logan takes a deep breath and steps up so he's even with Patton. Mind and heart, then, he says. I am logic, and I'm willing to gamble myself for this cause. What do I have to lose, after all? Interesting, muses the Earl King, pressing a finger to his lower lip. But it seems as if there's something missing. Mind and heart don't make up an entire soul, after all. I am passion, Roman announces, leaping forwards to join the other two. Without a healthy dose of that, any soul would be in trouble. And make that double, Remus adds, joining the line with a hop and a skip. Passion Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Is that enough soul for you, Dark Souls Tree, or do you need more of us for the meat grinder? Well, I don't know, says the Earl King, and looks over at the two that haven't volunteered themselves up yet. Do I? Virgil hesitates. It's extremely visible and almost painful to watch. He's obviously torn between common sense and the knowledge that a failure to commit to this may just result in inevitable catastrophe. Fine, he says, obviously extremely uncomfortable. Anxiety, that's me. That's what I do. I'm in, if you even want that. He doesn't make a move to step forward to join the others, though. And you? Which is of course directed at Janus, at the very back of the room, who's standing with crossed arms and a carefully blank expression on his face. At this, he looks up and offers a tiny, awful little twist of a smile. I'm only self-preservation. You certainly don't want me involved. I can't help but feel that's not the entire truth, says the Earl King. Surely there's more to you than that. Oh, believe me, I wouldn't lie in a situation like this, comes the dry response. No, I think I'll stay out of this, thank you very much. I'd say that 5 out of 6 is more than good enough for you. Take the deal, Earl King. There's a very charged moment where Logan has absolutely no idea what's going to happen next, and is more than slightly dreading it. Then the Earl King laughs, a short bark of amusement like a single staccato note, and says, 5 out of 6. Well, I don't see why not. A deal's a deal, then. You have until tonight's banquet ends, 6 hours, that is, no more, no less. If you can find and wake your friend by then, and if he can attend the banquet of open eye and conscious mind, then you may take him with you when you depart. If not, he shrugs, open and languid, I get you and him, which seems to be the optimal ending for me if what you've told me is true. We accept, says Roman instantly, and Logan tries not to sigh too loudly. Janus does nothing to muffle his own sigh of exasperation. But there's nothing to be done now. Logan doesn't have his vocabulary cards with him, so he's unsure of the exact phrase, but he's moderately sure it goes somewhat along the lines of in for a cent, in for a slightly more extravagant unit of currency. You have free reign of the palace, of course, the Earl King adds, and the banquet begins at sundown in my personal quarters, so do be sure not to arrive late. A smile that sets Logan's teeth on edge. You're dismissed. Very kind of you, Janus says, because nobody else seems up to voicing anything, and then grabs Virgil by one arm and Remus by the other and starts dragging them out. By the expression on his face, however subtle it may be, Logan surmises that if he had any more hands on hand right now, he'd be doing the same for the rest of them. As it is, Logan is the one who takes up the task of dragging Roman and Patton out, because at least one of them looks frankly murderous right now, and he's actually rather surprised which one it is. Every person of significance that we have met so far in this world is a reflection of one of us, or someone that we know, Logan says, as soon as the doors shut behind them and they're standing in the notably empty and silent hallway just outside of the Earl King's garden. The short silence that follows is genuinely maddening, because he can tell they don't understand, and it's the first time he's had the chance to voice this properly since his realization to all of them together. So it makes even worse because they seem to all be listening, and yet... "What?" says Janice. It's not really disbelief in his tone, just flat incomprehension, which might be worse. "Shane signed Ark," Logan says, trying to force himself to speak evenly and clearly, without all the words just spilling out in an incoherent mess. "Shane is an alternate of the name Joan. I guess sign is the same, and I shouldn't have to spell out what the last name is an allusion to." "Wait," says Patton. "So, you're saying that was Joan?" "No," says Logan, "at least, not entirely. Octavian. One of the lesser-known names of one of the greatest Roman emperors ever known." A beat as he looks around incredulously, waiting for everyone else to catch up. "He's a bard, for God's sake!" "What?" "Wait," Virgil says, eyes widening in realization. "Oh, man, nice. Princey has a crush on himself." "Yes, and," Roman snaps back without shame, "a healthy amount of self-love is good for the soul." "That's weird," Patton says. "Really weird. Weirder than usual, actually. Are you sure you're just not, making things up because of the weirdness?" "I do not just make things up," Logan retorts sharply. "Thomas did mention something about people and mirrors," Janice points out with a little frown. "This could be what he was referring to." "That was the conclusion I had come to, yes," Logan agrees, relieved that he seems to be making at least some semblance of sense. The act of corroboration in itself is immensely reassuring for some reason he can't place. "Oh, of course," Roman says, snapping his fingers twice and then pointing at Janice. "The lady back in town, Helly. I knew she reminded me of someone. That was Valerie." Helly. Diminutive of heliotrope, alternative name of the plant known as valerian, Logan mutters, the connections coming lightning fast. "I believe Remus and I met Camden's equivalent. And, Patton, you mentioned a wizard?" "Talon," Virgil says, biting his lip. "Jays, birds, talons, it makes sense. They had the hair for it anyway." "Okay, so where are the rest of us, then?" Remus demands eagerly. "I want to meet my reflection. Bet he's hotter than yours." Logan thinks about the Earl King and his dreadful, knowing eyes and the way his hand had looked, cupped around Thomas's face, and for a moment he really can't say anything at all, and then he clears his throat and manages to say, "No, I think we'd have noticed anyone resembling you by now. As for the rest of us..." His throat briefly closes up again, and he lets out a growl of a cough to force himself to keep going. Now is not the time to be freezing up. "I believe I can pretty conclusively state that we have met my fantasy double by this point." "The Earl King, of course," Roman says, looking faintly horrified. "Jesus Christ on a pogo stick, getting fucked with a decoratively carved pineapple!" Remus lets out a low whistle, shaking his head. "You have rotten luck. At least Roman's double knows catchy songs. You ended up with a possessive fairy stalker with a flower fetish. Wonder what that says about you." "Thank you," forces out Logan through gritted teeth. "I am wildly aware of the situation as it stands." Janice leans against a wall, crossing his arms. "As interesting as this alternate us business is it really all that useful to us right now? Our current goal is getting Thomas back." Logan sighs and tries to fight back the surprisingly real headache that's forming already through sheer willpower alone. It's difficult, especially since every headache he's experienced up till now has been purely conceptual in form. Being separated from Thomas like this is wrong. Logan doesn't know if anyone else is feeling the effects quite to the extent that he is, but with every passing minute he's becoming more and more aware of the body that he's inhabiting, of the muscles and bones and skin and arteries and veins and flesh making it up, and how they're functioning, of how he actually needs to breathe to survive instead of just as an affectation. The metaphorical Schrodinger's box has been peeked into, and the universe is suddenly paying a lot more attention to how he functions, and he's incredibly afraid that he might not be able to keep up. "Yes," he says. "Yes, you're probably right. My apologies. I felt that needed to be shared, but perhaps now was not the time." He takes the shortest possible moment of time to collect himself. "Let's go find Thomas." "Just like that?" Virgil asks, with a raised eyebrow. He's tugging his hoodie around himself so tightly at this point that Logan's surprised it hasn't ripped under the strain yet. "No plans? No calculations?" "I suspect both would be pointless," Logan shrugs. "Plans can wait after we've found him. First things first, after all." "Let's just not split up this time," Roman suggests carefully. "Fairy palaces are really not a great place to do that." Splitting up is generally agreed upon to be a pretty bad idea, so they set off down the hallway, trying every door in sight. All of them are locked firmly, and no amount of rattling and shoving budges them. They make it through approximately 30 doors before Roman suggests that they go back and ask Octavian for advice. Mirror shenanigans aside, he did seem to be quite knowledgeable about the Earl King and fairies in general. But upon going back, they quickly discover that the great oak doors they had entered from are just as locked and equally unwilling to budge. "This has to be against the rules." Virgil delivers a vicious kick to the door, and it doesn't help matters in the least. "He doesn't own us. He can't just keep us here." Patton tries asking some of the friendlier-looking fae for directions to the guest quarters, but every one of them turns away, unspeaking. It's very probable that they've been ordered by their king not to interact, in case they accidentally or purposefully give some clue or hint on how to free Thomas. With no help from that avenue, they're forced to press on deeper into the mountain palace. It becomes less sunny and far more mossy as they continue on. The vegetation loses none of its vibrant verdancy, but it's now clinging to walls in patterned patches that are glowing with an uncanny bioluminescence. They keep trying the doors, and as they reach a stretch of empty corridor where no people are present, the doors actually start opening. Not that it's much help. The rooms they open onto are bare and empty, containing little furnishings and no occupants. A bed and a few chairs at most. Sometimes there's a window that's more like a slit, looking out onto the town from the mountain, and letting in a small sliver of sunlight from outside. Some of the beds look like they've been recently occupied, judging by the ruffled sheets, but there's a thin layer of dust that coats quite a lot of them. "Do you think fairies sleep?" Patton wonders after 7 of these rooms. "Well, I'm pretty sure they fuck," Remus replies. "Like, historically speaking. Fairies love seducing people, taking lovers from the mortal realm." "You don't need a bed for that," Janice points out, and looks like he's instantly regretting it because a shit-eating smile creeps across Remus's face. "That's true," Logan says, cutting off the inevitable tangent. "But if you're a fairy with a penchant for taking human lovers, I suppose that you do need accommodations for the mortals you kidnap." Roman, who's already moved on to the next door, opens it and immediately lets out a yell of combined shock and triumph and practically throws himself through it. "You found him?" Janice is already moving faster than Logan ever could have imagined him moving. He's not alone, because there's momentarily a 5-side pile-up in the doorway to this new room, as everybody, sans Roman, tries to cram themselves through it at once. This is resolved with a lot of yelling and complaining, and then they're in, and they're staring at who they've found. "We found him," Patton says. "I found him," Roman corrects. "You found him, and he's asleep," says Virgil, again. The room has one remarkably extravagant 4-poster bed situated right in the middle of the room, quite a lot of furniture, and what looks to be a walk-in closet on the far wall. It's actually quite a lot more furnished than the rest of the rooms they've seen. There's a few rocks and coins on the bedside table and books on the shelves, and it almost looks lived in. But all of this barely catches Logan's attention, because the most important person in the universe is there on the bed. And oh, Thomas. He's covered in flowers and moss, and he's in another one of those silky gowns that he had been wearing when he stumbled back to his house. The previous night? Or is it the same day, still? It's hard to tell. This one's pearly white, shimmering in strange colors when the light glances off it. He's half curled up on his side, breathing peacefully, grass sprouting from the mattress and in between his fingers, daisies growing around his folded arms, and vines creeping up around his neck, with roses blooming in his hair. He looks strangely radiant, caught in the sole thready ray of golden sunlight glinting in from beyond the mountain. "As much as I hate to point it out when Roman's right here to do it for us," Janice says, "this is all very Sleeping Beauty, isn't it?" Roman visibly starts, then shakes his head, apparently clearing it. Yes! You're right. So, maybe the solution is kissing him? We are not going to kiss a sleeping person, Roman, says Virgil, glaring at him. As previously established, that's really fucking creepy. And entirely too easy, Logan says. I doubt we would have been allowed to so much as venture close to Thomas's room if the solution was as easy as kissing him awake. Maybe, says Roman, but nothing ventured, nothing gained, so... He leans over the bed, brushing aside a blooming rose that's in his way, and presses a kiss to Thomas's forehead, and then, after a second, another, quicker, to the lips. Nothing happens. Thomas doesn't even so much as flinch. Try using tongue, Remus suggests. Roman does not. He takes a seat on the bed, right next to Thomas, and starts frowning extremely hard, looking as if he's trying to remember something. There's got to be other fairy tale stories that involve waking people up from comas, said Virgil, also sitting down on the bed. Right? Well, there's the Snow Queen, starts Roman, and then shakes his head. No, wait, that also involves kissing. Drat. Why are fairy tales so fixated on kisses being the solution? Patton wonders. Why can't it be, I don't know, a nice hug for once? Yes, I'm sure hugging Thomas will be the solution to all of our problems, Janice deadpans. I'll give it a try anyway, Patton decides, and does. Unsurprisingly, it doesn't have any effect at all, apart from Patton getting a face full of flowering herbs that make him sneeze for a full minute. By this point, Janice has made his way around the entire room, apparently searching it for anything worth seeing, and is now approaching that side door that they've all been ignoring up till now. Remus is working his fingers into the crack that serves as a window, apparently trying to see if he can widen it, very unlikely, or else catch his fingers in it and twist them in some sickeningly wrong way. But upon seeing Janice nudge the side door open, he pulls away abruptly and comes bounding over to see what's going on. Inside are a large number of elaborately crafted formal outfits of every color and cloth and style. They also all happen to be exactly the same size, and there is an almost perfect chance that it is, in fact, their size. Remus dives for the green clothes immediately and without hesitation, tearing a number of them off their hangings. He starts stripping, also immediately and without hesitation. Oh, says Virgil from the bed. Oh, so we're all going to go and accept the fairy clothes now, are we? That sounds like an amazing way to get, strangled by our own tuxedos. I think the clothes may be the least of our worries at this point, Janice points out, although he's giving the closet a look of suspicion. There's probably no harm in, dressing up a little, says Roman. He's eyeing the closet, and in particular one long robe with a fur-trimmed, gold-lined cape, with something like longing in his eyes. I suppose our current states of attire are perhaps a bit too casual for a fairy banquet, Logan allows, and then sighs. But not now. We need to focus on Thomas. If we can't get him awake, then attending it is somewhat pointless. We have until sundown, so... Janice peers out of the crack, judging the position of the sun. A few hours, maybe 1.5, depending. He looks back at everyone else. Any clever ideas, then, seeing as we do seem to be on a bit of a deadline? There is a distinct lack of replies to this. We can try a lot of different things to wake him up until then, suggests Patton. Like, I don't know, pouring water on him or something. Can we find water? There's got to be water around here somewhere. Janus does, in fact, have water in his bag, as well as a lot of other potentially useful items. There's initial intense wave of activity from the entire group as they attempt just about every possible method of waking someone up. Pinching, shaking, stabbing, very lightly, and it's with a pencil. It's fine. They don't let Remus go too overboard with that anyway. Water and holding his nose, nothing. When they try to pull him from the bed to see if getting him on the cold stone floor will do any good, the flowers and vines surrounding him actively fight back, pulling him back into place and holding him down, no matter how hard they try hacking at the plants with their limited supplies. This is ridiculous, Janice huffs, stumbling backwards from yet another failed attempt at getting the assorted botanical bondage off their source. He turns to Roman and Remus, prying several thorns out of the skin of his hands. Can't you two do something? Swords or knives would be helpful, Can't you try summoning some extra hands to give us a, hand? Roman retorts. Oh, wait, you can't, because none of us can do shit right now. What he said. Here, let me summon some fucks, Remus adds, and then waves his empty hands in the air. Would you look at that? None. I am out of fucks, and also knives. That doesn't explain Virgil, Logan says quietly, and when everyone turns to look at him, nods at the side in question. Your voice. You could use your distortion amplification earlier, which definitely isn't a human trait. Can you still do that? Well, I mean, I am pretty stressed right now, Virgil says, and the distorted undertones kick in halfway through, making everyone jump. He acquires a thoughtful expression, then looks at Thomas. You left your gas stove on, he growls, in his most threatening, urgent tone. No reaction, from Thomas at least. Logan frowns, something occurring to him. Actually, did we ever turn the stove off? Oh, fuck. Virgil's eyes go wide. Did we? I can't remember. I don't think we did. Never mind that, Janice says, and flicks his tongue out experimentally. There's nothing unusual about it in the least, and he's already scowling. Why is it, I wonder, that you are the only one of us whose abilities are still functioning more or less as they should be? If you're accusing me of something, Virgil begins, already drawing himself up indignantly. No, Janice says hurriedly. No, I wasn't. Sorry. If I'm not paying attention, all of my rhetorical questions end up sounding evil and ominous. I should work on that. Oh, says Virgil. I'll be sure to add that to the list of questions I have about this place, Logan says, who does in fact have a rather extensive mental list of questions already. For now, let's keep trying to wake up Thomas. I'm sure there's something we haven't thought of yet. Hours pass. The sun outside lowers further and further until it's setting right at the horizon, in line with the river they'd arrived on, and the moss on the walls is starting to glow with a warm yellow light, keeping the room illuminated. Although the only thing it's really succeeding at illuminating right now is everyone's lack of productivity and immense frustration. Many ideas have dwindled down into no ideas at all, and mostly they're just all sitting around the room, frowning and grimacing at the walls and each other. Remus is sprawled across the sheets of the bed, tugging none too gently at the many knots in Thomas's hair, while Patton is curled up next to him, half wrapped around him and looking downright miserable. Virgil's flicking through the outfits in the cupboard with a scowl on his face, and Roman's pacing angrily, and Janice and Logan are just sitting there, thinking. Well, Logan's thinking at least. It can be extrapolated and safely assumed that Janice is probably thinking as well, but probably not as hard as Logan is, because, you see, Logan's trying to come up with a plan. An exceedingly clever plan that will get them all out of this mess. Safe, healthy, and preferably with no strange fairy enchantments or curses in the mix. It's tough work, but someone's got to do it. And although there's nothing solid yet, he can feel the plan coming, as if it's some essential fact just on the tip of his tongue, waiting for the right catalyst to set off the biochemical reaction in his brain. We should get ready for the banquet, says Janice eventually, weary and resigned. The king did say not to be late, after all. He swings his canvas bag back and forth in one hand, then sets it down before beginning to shrug off his turtleneck. His tone is less than enthusiastic when he says, Let's get dressed up, then. Logan sits bolt upright, eyes going wide and wild. That's it! He exclaims, hands pressing down on the floor as he tries to right himself after an almost physical jolt of sudden understanding. The catalyst has revealed itself. It's almost like that moment of electric comprehension that had occurred when Logan had met the Earl King's gaze all those hours ago. But this moment, it's not terrifying realization. It's a pure moment of elation. He'd be tempted to shout Eureka at the top of his lungs, but it's probably not the best time for that. What? Demands Roman, standing up. What is it? I think we can get Thomas back, Logan says, and grins. Outright grins. It's unusual for him, granted, but considering the metaphorical pieces that have just metaphorically fallen together in his mind, he feels as if he deserves it. I have a plan.